Okay. We recommend that you go to speaker view and stop your video to help with Zoom bandwidth. A big thank you to all of our instructors for making this fall semester possible. The curriculum committee will be meeting next Wednesday, the 28th, after class at Rehoboth. And if you have any ideas and names of people who could do a class, please either stop in to the curriculum or send it in to Bill Beeson at the SUGA email. And if you're a Zoom only member and decide to upgrade your membership to include in-person classes, again, send Bill an email and he'll take care of that for you. Our instructor today, Sal Depasquale, needs no introduction, but I think most know that he had a career as a security analyst working with security and criminal justice issues. He's been teaching at the OLLI program at Emory and Kennesaw for years and joined SUGA back in the winter of 2021. Sal is also an avid volunteer with Meals on Wheels and enjoys hiking. So Sal, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks, George. Thanks again for plugging Meals on Wheels. We're going to look at the murder of Martin Luther King, and I'd like for you to think of this as an extension of the class that we did on the murder of John Kennedy. And because for those who didn't attend that class, let me just refresh quickly, which is the people can talk about lots of conspiracy theories in a derogatory way to say, well, it's just, you know, sci-fi kinds of things. It's just crazy, nut stuff. And it's important to understand that a conspiracy is a theory when there isn't an investigation that gathers evidence to validate or discredit the theory. And my argument has been with the assassinations of the decade of the 1960s, there has been a paucity of serious investigation. There's a lot of, you know, paper written, but not serious investigation from my point of view. And what we talked about is that it may seem bizarre to think that someone in the government would be involved, someone from CIA or FBI or any of that, in some sort of conspiracy to kill an official in our country. However, it is important to recognize that in the post-World War II period, our intelligence agencies did indeed participate in operations, in clandestine operations, some of which involved assassinations. And in fact, due to lawsuits and Freedom of Information Act requirements, the agency printed a book about their manual for how to perpetrate an assassination. So it's important to understand that there are people who do these things. And in the class on Kennedy, we went through in detail what might be the training and what would be the components that would be the part of an assassination plot. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we proceed with the Martin Luther King case. And in the Kennedy case, we talked about what might be motivations, and we talked about anti-communism being something that could be ginned up to get people angry with Kennedy because he wasn't tough enough on the commies. And we also talked about the civil rights movement and how Kennedy was becoming more favorable to actions in support of civil rights for Black people in America. And that there were people who were enraged by the Board of Education case in 1954 that required integration in the schools, and they would not accept it. And they were adamant that Black people could not be treated in an equal way with white people. And it's, we still see vestiges of that today when you consider the white nationalist movements and acts of violence that have been taking place over the past couple of years. So part of my thesis in my classes, and as I've studied history and presented history, is that America is really another component of an overall criminal enterprise that began 10,000 years ago when humans entered the Neolithic period, and we discovered agriculture and animal husbandry and possessions and wealth and power and greed that unleashed a criminal enterprise that involved warfare, enslavement of people, invasion of other lands, conquering of other lands, so that we have a whole transformation of what was the human experience for the past 350,000 years of our existence. So again, America, in my view, is simply another iteration of that. And as I presented before, racial animus has merely been a tool for rationalizing and justifying inhuman behavior, and so it's a tool that works, and as long as it works, it will continue, no matter how much science and evidence is produced to say that there is no racial superiority in any way, shape, or form. Still, we must recognize that there are people within our population and within the world population who still embrace those ideas. And so we're going to look at the murder of Dr. King. And as I've said before, an event like the murdering of Dr. King is a product of other events that are converging, that make that event, provide the foundation for the event under consideration. And what I'm suggesting here is that we have Martin Luther King, who is fighting for Black civil rights. He then expands his movement into opposition to the Vietnam War, because if it's inhuman to treat Black people like less than human, it's also inhuman to be treating Vietnamese as less than human. And he also then wants to expand his coalition to not just be addressing the issues related to Black people, but he wants to address the issues that are there for poor people, including poor white people and Hispanics and people of all colors who are subject to being brutalized and victimized by the power elite. And so what we have going on at the same time in post-World War II America was terrified of communists. There's reasons for it. There were public relations campaigns to make that happen. But we came to a point where we began equating communism and socialism with Nazism. And so there was great fear. The FBI was obsessed with it and believed that the civil rights movement was part of a communist conspiracy to sabotage America. And so in their law enforcement role, we will soon see an assault upon Martin Luther King, who's leading a civil rights movement. The Cold War was going on, and that is where there's antagonisms between Russia, China, and America, and the West, Western European countries. And so there was fear of a nuclear holocaust that might happen. At the same time, the civil rights movement is gathering momentum, and in post-World War II America, Americans did think, look, these Black people participated in the war. They deserve better than they're getting. Harry Truman spoke up for it and others. And so there's also a backlash to that movement. And that backlash comes in the form of the KKK with homicidal hate for Black people, Hispanics, and people who are not of the Baptist faith. And on a more pervasive level is white fear of all people of color. It goes deep into our roots. Indeed, at the American Revolution, John Adams and Ben Franklin wrote fake news stories to gin up the colonists, to galvanize against the fight, to galvanize with each other to fight against England, something that they were not previously predisposed to doing. So we'll start with an introduction in this class and some concepts to look at. Next week, we'll talk about the FBI and its relationship with Dr. King. We'll then look at the civil rights movement and the actions of white supremacists. In class 4, we'll look at what happens when Martin Luther King turns against the war in Vietnam. Then we'll look at the Poor People's Campaign. This is happening, being organized shortly before Dr. King is killed, and may be one of the key factors in driving people to want to eliminate him. And those of you who have attended the classes on American history will recall Bacon's Rebellion from the 1600s, where he tried to bring together white slaves and Black slaves in a rebellion, and it terrified. He died off before the rebellion was over, but he was successful in doing it, and it terrified Virginia, which then prompted Virginia to pass laws that says you can treat your Black slaves like this, you can treat your white slaves like this other way. So it was a way of driving wedges between them because they were terrified of them. In class 6, we'll look at the events in Memphis. Then we'll really take a good hard look at James Earl Ray. And in our last class, we will have a conclusion and discussion about what we have. And so part of my thesis in my American history class is that the last great chance for America to become the country and nation and government that it had advertised itself as being, that chance came at the end of the Civil War. And my argument is that at that point, America needed to write a new constitution. Its constitution had been written for a slaveocracy. And once you have a constitution for a slaveocracy, you can't amend it into being one that is freedom for all people. So we needed a new constitution and did not get it. There were amendments passed, but at the end of the Civil War, Black people had been given land and schooling, but it was quickly stripped away as the Jim Crow Black codes became pervasive throughout the South, essentially re-enslaving the emancipated population and simply changing the name of slavery to Jim Crow. And at the end of World War I, there was a sentiment that we needed to start, really dealing with civil rights and respecting Black people who had served in the armed forces. However, it was quickly met by backlash with lynchings. Same happened after World War II, only this time Black people were more emboldened to stand up against the attacks by white supremacists. And so let's take a look at, at that event happening. End of World War II.
On the 8 o'clock Augusta to Columbia coach that night was Sergeant Isaac Woodard, headed home to Winnsboro, South Carolina to see his wife for the first time in several years. Woodard was still in uniform, carrying a battle star for bravery under fire and a final paycheck from the U.S. Army in the extraordinary sum of $695. Enough to start the kind of life he hadn't dared dream of before the war. Like the other 900,000 African-American soldiers returning home from duty, Isaac Woodard had come to see this bright new future as his due.
African Americans had fought in all of the major wars in American history, and there's always been this theme of, if we fight and we show our loyalty, then we are going to advance and be recognized as more equal citizens. And that dream had always been frustrated. But World War II was actually quite different from past wars for African Americans, because it was a special kind of war.
This war, this particular war, crystallizes around the idea of this fight against fascism. And that means that it is a fight against inequality, of suppressing groups of people because of their race. So you have Black soldiers coming home, having been inculcated with the idea that America stands for something different than fascism, something different than racial and ethnic discrimination, something better.
By 10 o'clock on that February evening, Isaac Woodard was little more than an hour away from his homecoming in Winnsboro.
The atmosphere on the bus is jovial, filled with the relief that soldiers feel after surviving 15 months at war. Black soldiers and white soldiers are talking together, joking together. Eventually, a bottle of whiskey gets opened and passed around.
There were a few non-soldiers on the bus, and they were very uncomfortable with the interaction between the white and Black soldiers. There were complaints to the bus driver, and the bus driver didn't like it.
There are, of course, in 1946, no bathroom facilities on public buses. Isaac Woodard asked the bus driver if at the next stop he could be allowed to disembark and to go to the bathroom.
And the bus driver tells him, "Boy, go sit back down."
The bus driver cursed him. Isaac Woodard cursed him back and proclaimed his manhood.
He just said to the gentleman, you know, you don't have to speak to me in that manner. I'm a man just like you. In other words, give me respect.
Military training and service turned a Black man from the rural Deep South with a 5th grade education into a man willing to say words that he knew could put his life at risk. There is no doubt when he said that he was under any illusions about what he was saying, where he was saying it, on a bus, at night, in the Deep South. But he was a veteran. He was wearing the uniform. He was surrounded by veterans who were wearing the uniforms. They were returning from a war that they had won, and he was a stronger man because of it.
The bus driver is furious. At the next town, he goes looking for a police officer to have Woodard removed from his bus. Woodard's kind of perplexed. He steps off the bus, and as he's trying to explain himself, the police chief brings out his blackjack, which is like a baton, but it's spring-loaded and it has tremendous force, and hits Woodard over the head with it.
A soldier aboard the bus watched as the officer took Woodard by the arm and forced him around the corner and out of sight. That is the last I saw of him, he would tell investigators a few months later.
They started beating him all across the head, and they gouged his eyes out. They didn't beat him out. They put the stick in there and twisted it. They threw him in jail, and he told me they poured whiskey over him to say he was drunk. He was arrested for supposedly disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, and being drunk. He was not drunk. He was not being disorderly, and he did not disturb the peace.
He spends the night in jail, unable to see, in excruciating pain. The next morning, he is taken to the judge. He is levied a fine, but he can't see to sign the paperwork that is put before him. Ultimately, when Woodard is examined by specialists, they determine that he will never see again. The injuries are severe and they are irreversible. He will be blind for life.
And there are certainly many stories as such that capture the lynchings that took place. It happened at the end of World War I, when Black soldiers were lynched, some of them while still wearing their uniform. Black people are now fighting back at the end of World War II, but it's important to understand that the protective edifice, law enforcement, is aligned with the ideas of keeping Black people under control. This is deep into American history. This goes before the American Revolution. Militias were formed to control slaves and to fight Native Americans. That's what they were for. The Second Amendment is all about arming the militias to fight against Black people and Native Americans. And so the protective edifice that has emerged, mind you, our police and forces and others are an extension of what was the militias before the American Revolution. And so they're aligned with the idea that we must keep them under control. Public relations argues that yet that Black people, however, are content. They're happy with our system. This is our peculiar institution. And but the protest, and so what you're getting is in the civil rights movement, it is, we need to demonstrate that that isn't true. We need to show that we are not content, that we want freedom, and we don't have the weaponry and other things to fight. So what we will do is we will demonstrate, then the protective edifice will attack us. And when they do, the whole world will be watching, and they will see that, no, we are not content. And yes, it is brutality that is keeping us under control. And so the argument, however, on the part of the white supremacists was that the protests were a product of outside agitators. Who are the outside agitators? The communists. And so this narrative takes hold, and the ideas of nonviolent protest were demanding that there be an end of segregation, and it was a means for exposing the lie. Well, I'm having a little difficulty with Zoom. It's not showing all of the videos. We're going to see if it'll work this time. If not, I'll let the sound play without the video. This is a production of Amazon, that is of Martin Luther King and the FBI. It's a very good one. I hope it comes through. Let's see what happens.
Or about the distance from Buenos Aires to Rio de Janeiro. They came from Jackson, Mississippi.
Let's see if I can get it to work.
No video.
Okay.
At this time, I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation.
From 1955 to 1968, Martin Luther King led a peaceful 20th century American Revolution. In the short span of 13 years, the nonviolent civil rights movement which he headed changed the face of American society.
Photo of FBI investigative files being copied.
You know, when you construct a man as a great man, there's nothing almost more satisfying than also seeing him represented as the opposite.
During the 60s, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI conducted surveillance of Martin Luther King by exposing the secrets of his private life. The FBI hoped to humiliate King and weaken his authority as a leader. Now, thanks to newly declassified documents, much of their intelligence...
When the National Archives puts government documents up on the web, in public, one has to confront them. One cannot pretend they don't exist.
I think one of the difficulties for historians in dealing with really the fruits of all of this surveillance of King is whether or not we then become complicit in what the FBI was doing.
But you know this about humans. What we're best at is convincing ourselves of our own righteousness. I think this entire episode...
That's the voice of James Comey, who led the reorganization of the FBI and the crushing of domestic surveillance for political purposes.
Episode represents the darkest part of the Bureau's history.
Tapes from the hotel rooms, the FBI reports of what was going on. Those are pieces of information that we shouldn't have. Whatever comes out will certainly help us understand him as a person, and that's kind of our duty, is to understand.
No such promise for the picture you're about to watch. The story isn't over.
This is about the March on Washington.
They came from Los Angeles and San Francisco, or about the distance from Moscow to Bombay. They came from Cleveland, from Chicago, or about the distance from Buenos Aires to Rio de Janeiro. They came from Jackson, Mississippi, from Birmingham, Alabama, or about the distance from Johannesburg to Dar es Salaam. He had been insulted, beaten, jailed, drenched with water, chased by dogs. But he was coming to Washington, he said, to swallow up hatred and love, to overcome violence by peaceful protest.
We're not going to fight our white brethren with malice, nor are we going to fight them with any falsified stories, nor are we going to fight them with hatred, but we're going to fight them with love. When they hate us, we're going to absorb their hatred in love. When they speak against us, we're going to speak things of love toward them. We're not going to let their hatred turn us around, but we're going to love them on every side.
We had been through the battles in Birmingham. We thought that was the movement. And it was. But after it was over, we realized that what had happened was that the March on Washington took a black Southern movement and turned it into a national and international movement for human rights.
One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
The FBI was most alarmed about King because of his success. And they were particularly concerned that he was this powerful, charismatic figure who had the ability to mobilize people.
And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring.
When you look at the social movements from the point of view of the FBI, it looks very different. You know, J. Edgar Hoover is famous for saying that he feared the rise of a black messiah.
Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
After Dr. King gave his famous March on Washington speech, Wednesday, August 28, 1963, and a memo dated the 30th of August, no later than that, the second person in the FBI, may have been Sullivan, sends an urgent memo in which he says, after the March on Washington, it's clear that Martin Luther King Jr. is the most dangerous Negro in America. And we have to use every resource at our disposal to destroy him.
Sorry you couldn't see the video with that, but it is important to understand that we had arrived at a place where the FBI is convinced that the civil rights movement being led by this charismatic person is controlled by communists, and they must stop it at all cost. Now, I want you to, for those of you who took part in the class on JFK, if you will recall, Lee Harvey Oswald defected to the Soviet Union. Lee Harvey Oswald threatened to give away top secret information. Lee Harvey Oswald comes back a couple of years later, but the FBI isn't particularly interested in him. Oh yeah, they stop by and have a cup of coffee, but Lee Harvey Oswald is not thrown in jail. Lee Harvey Oswald is not going to be destroyed by the FBI. Why not? He's not arrested. You're hearing a lot about the Espionage Act now. Lee Harvey Oswald should have been subjected to the laws about espionage, but that didn't happen. So they were, but now we get to Martin Luther King, and he is organizing a group, and he has friends who had been involved in the Communist Party and are involved in the movement. And so he is the most dangerous Negro in America, and he must be stopped. Now, it's important to understand that we've looked at the Woodard case and what happened when he was blinded. One of the people on the video was a federal judge who wrote a book about what happened to Sergeant Woodard. And a federal judge who had heard the case was incensed over it. And Judge Waring, he becomes a person who influences the NAACP and suggests to Thurgood Marshall a strategy for how to get a case before the court that will then overturn separate but equal. It becomes the heart of the Brown v. Board of Education case. And that case that then said we have to have equality set forth it made the white supremacists of America, their heads explode.
But Ruby was making history. 6 years earlier, after decades of struggle, the NAACP had won a major legal victory, Brown versus Board of Education, in which the Supreme Court declared that the doctrine of separate but equal schools was unconstitutional. But in many places, that triumph did not translate into change. For years after Brown, much of the South simply refused to integrate. Now, Ruby would be one of 6 New Orleans children chosen to desegregate several all-white elementary schools.
They were screaming and shouting and chanting too for 6-8. We don't want to integrate.
The mothers of downtown New Orleans screaming at a Negro child as she entered the William Franz Elementary School, first in the city to be integrated.
Once I got into school, all of these people here rushed inside of the building. They were taking out their children. Over 500 kids walked out of school that day.
What is your reaction to the court's decision continuing integration?
We don't want the niggas going in that school.
Well,
it's a white school.
They didn't see a child. They saw change in what they thought was being taken from them. They never saw a child.
If you believe the faith you lost so long ago will return upon your shore.
The image of a 6-year-old child heckled by an angry mob became a powerful icon for the young movement. Ruby's example soon inspired others.
In the 1950s and 60s, the South became a battleground over the issues of integration and civil rights. A new breed of Klansmen signed up as soldiers in the fight against black equality. In the 1950s, segregation was the accepted way of Southern life. Yet separate but equal was only half true. Blacks enjoyed little equality in a time of racial unrest.
If you lived in the South in the middle 1950s and you were black, if you wanted to eat something in a downtown cafeteria, you had to stand at the end of the counter, take it out in the street and eat it. If you wanted to go to the bathroom in downtown of most big cities in the South and most small towns, you had to wait till you got home. When you got on a bus, you had to sit in the back. You lived in a world surrounded by fear, surrounded by not knowing who you were, what you could do, where you could go. It was a horrific, horrific way of life.
In 1954, the United States Supreme Court struck down school segregation in the historic Brown versus Board of Education ruling. The decision was met with a firestorm of protest from the South. The Klan rose again as the walls of segregation began to crumble.
Out here in the wildwoods, the beasts don't integrate. Our friend and the fishes in the river don't integrate. The fowls are there. They still stay segregated. They got more sense than a bunch of Supreme Court judges up there.
Brown versus Board lit the fuse.
Well, I know that you know the story. And it's important in understanding, as we look at Martin Luther King, the intensity of the thinking of people who could not accept Black people as even being human. We still have that debate going on today. It's imperative that the events then, that you relate them to the events today, because they continue to go on. And I'm gonna hopefully get these glitches with the FBI video fixed, because I wanted to show something about Rosa Parks. But Martin Luther King really came into the civil rights movement because of Rosa Parks. He was a minister in Montgomery, Alabama, and Rosa was arrested, and people were trying to organize, and they asked King if they could use the basement of his church for organizing. And so he eventually got, catapulted into the movement and into the leadership of it. And we've looked at it before, the murder of Emmett Till. It is also going on at this time. And so America is at an inflection point. It's at a confrontation between white people and Black people. I'm trying something new with some poems that I want to close out the class with. Let me know if you like this or not. It's just something I wanted to give a try. This one is titled 2 Days in April. April 4, 1968. At 6:01 p.m., Martin Luther King Jr. was shot by a white supremacist named James Earl Ray while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. At 7:05 p.m., he was pronounced dead, killed, according to an expert panel of forensic pathologists, by a single soft point metal jacketed bullet fired from a distance by a high velocity rifle. The bullet, a 30-06, entered his right cheek and traveled in a downward motion, shattering his jaw, tearing through numerous vital arteries, and fracturing his spine in several places. He was 39 years old. April 9, 1968. After seeing her father so still in the casket, his youngest daughter, Bernice, pigtails in white lace bows. Let me get this back up. In white lace bows, fidgeted before laying her head on her mother's lap and listening. And one more that I want to close with. I think you'll recognize it. Southern trees bearing a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crow to pluck, for the rain to wither, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the trees to drop. Here is a strange and bitter crop. Okay, George.
Okay, for questions, we will be using the raise the hand function. And we recommend you stay in speaker view because we'll be spotlighting the questioner and you'll see Sal as well as the person asking the question.
Anybody have any questions, comments?
I think everyone's still digesting.
There's Madeline.
Madeline.
Madeline has her hand waving. You have to unmute Madeline.
Sorry, I couldn't find the raise hand function. So haven't done it in a while. I just wanted to make a comment that I have been watching Ken Burns's The U.S. and the Holocaust, and one of the things that you've talked about in some previous class, he also talked about, which is that when America was complaining about Hitler's treatment of the Jews back in the 30s, you know, before we get to the Holocaust, but that his comment back to America was our treatment of African Americans in the South and lynchings, and that we were basically doing the same thing, not on the same scale. And I think that's true, absolutely, but I think there are still people who have a hard time getting their head around that. So could you maybe comment about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we have a very difficult time looking in the mirror and getting an accurate report. I mean, what we're seeing today about, you know, you can't teach this to kids. You can't teach this other thing. It's part of that obfuscation so that people don't know what happened. The Nazis copied the Jim Crow laws in all 50 states to create the Nuremberg laws.
Yeah, they talk about that in the Ken Burns.
We were the template. Mm-hmm. So, and by the way, the Nazis thought that some of what were in those black codes were too draconian. So they didn't go as far. The brutality you know, because of what happened to black people has been covered up so much. We think of it as not being as horrific as the Holocaust.
So,
but I would argue it is, you know, it's right up there with it.
Yeah. Well, I'll suggest a mystery novel to people if they're interested that I just read. If you've ever heard the Moth Radio Hour on NPR, that guy, now I forget his name, George Dawes Green or something like that. He, I think, grew up in Brunswick, but had relatives in Savannah. And he has written this mystery novel called The Kingdoms of Savannah. You can get on the list at the library. That's what I did. And I'm not going to give away the history that he talks about in there, but there is some amazing, certainly unknown to me, and I think to most people who live here, piece of Georgia history in this mystery novel. And I started looking it up, and it is accurate. It is real. It's not something he made up for the book. So if you're interested in Savannah or a mystery set in Savannah and or learning some more Georgia history that he puts in there, it is quite interesting.
Yeah, great.
Ebook.
There you go.
I think Anne has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wondered who wrote the 2 poems that you read?
Oh, well, the first one is, I'll send it out too, Michael Judge, whose poems have been published in the Southern Review, the Literary Review, the Iowa Review, and Poet Lore. And I'll send this out to, along with my regular follow-up emails. The second was performed by Billie Holiday. It was originally
and co-written by her. I think she co-wrote it, maybe.
No, it was originally published as a poem by Abel Meerpool, who's also
Rosenberg,
also known as Lewis Allen, who is a Jewish school teacher from the Bronx.
Is he the person who adopted the Rosenberg boys? Yes,
I don't know, might be.
He is. He is the person who adopted the Rosenberg boys after Julius and Ethel were. I had known that, but didn't remember it. And I wanted to be reminded of who wrote that second one and the first one, as well as the first one too. I just, to comment on what Madeline said, I just wish that the people who needed to see the US and the Holocaust had watched it. But I suspect that pretty much the audience for the US and the Holocaust are the folks who knew most of it or much of it, and understood what all they were trying to accomplish in that series. But there are so many people that need to see that didn't. That's just what I had to say. I suspect that many of us in this class did see it. Mm-hmm. And if anyone didn't, I recommend that they go to Passport or some way try to watch that series.
Sure. Yeah. Look, I think there's Edward Bernays, who was the father of public relations, really a pretty bright guy. He talks about how narratives become created inside of people's heads and how difficult it is to change it. But he says the exercise of propaganda, it has a negative connotation, but that is what we do in everything. There's propaganda, which is a means of communicating information. He says it's unethical when it's based on lies, but it is what we do, and it is a form of coding, so that we don't have to read everything. We take messages from sources and we believe them. So it's kind of like, which news outlet do you go to? If you're reading the Washington Post or the New York Times, you'll have a certain worldview. If you're watching Fox, you got a different worldview. And I think the answer is that we have to keep trying to communicate information that is well researched, well resourced, and can hope to impact a change of view to get people to see it and maybe change. That, I think, is the eternal fight. Can we persist in making the effort to keep wanting to share information, to alter what are some very contorted views about how we should deal with each other. And by the way, for anybody who's interested, there's a website called Fever, if you're not familiar with it. And they highlight events going on around Atlanta and a whole bunch of other things. Anyway, on September 29th, there'll be a performance. It's at, I think, a church, on Sycamore Street in Decatur. It's Candlelight Jazz, celebrating Billie Holiday and Amy Winehouse. So,
wow.
Yeah. So that's just something.
Where you found it on Fever?
Fever, right.
What day did you say that was?
September 29th.
Okay.
No. Okay, Penny.
Hi. I noticed in the paper recently that there is a movement getting started that some people want to amend or even rewrite the Constitution now. And you had talked about that after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, would have been a logical time to have done that. I hadn't thought about that before. I need to think about that. But I wondered if you had heard about this movement and if you think that there is it's a strong movement.
Yeah, no, it's, so, mind you, the movement to amend the Constitution, to change the Constitution, has been a right-wing initiative for several years. Several states have signed up for it. They want to, get adopted into the Constitution, a balanced budget amendment, and a whole bunch of stuff like that. I think that my view has been that as a country, we are not on the same sheet of music, to use the cliche, but the same set of facts, the same set of values. We have very different values. And I don't know how a country survives like that. You can have disputes and disagreements and different ways of doing things, different philosophies about politics. But when you really don't have shared values, you're going to be in trouble. The fall of Rome, many others, that's what you had was, and there are people who study when governments collapse and what happens. And it really is when you don't have norms and mores that are widely accepted. We did it one time. We had another opportunity at World War II, I think, for that to happen, but there was blowback to that. And you're seeing that it was a long-term strategy to divide us because we were very connected and had some shared values at the end of World War II. However, they knew they had to, do it underground and to do it clandestinely. And they did, and you're seeing the fruits of their work today. Today, the idea of ending American democracy would have been anathema at the end of World War II. Today, we have a major political party that is advocating for that. So you really have to see that this is part of a long-term thing. My class in winter is going to be about the landscape that gave us Trump. And it's going to be really all about that and how it came together. I think this effort that has gone on to amend the Constitution is a part of that activity.
I think that's pretty scary.
Yeah. Well, look, I know people, kind of were not on board with all of this, but after, January 6th, I and others said People do not understand how close we were to the end of the American government. And we're just realizing it now. Madeline, if you can unmute.
Paris had something too. Originally, Tom, do you still have something?
Yes, well, yes, I did. Sal, I want to get back just a second to give you a real world experience on the issue of the race issues in traveling. As everybody knows, I'm retired military. And in 1963, I was stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia. And one of the officers that was with me was a black officer, and we became friends. We both got assignments to go after that to Fort Gordon. And I said, well, why don't we just drive together down to Fort Gordon? Because there's no sense in taking two cars. And he said, oh no, we can't do that. And I said, well, you know what? I'm from Detroit, Michigan. Why can't we do that? And he said, we'd get pulled out of the car and beat or killed if we try to do something like that. And I said, I don't understand that. That's not the kind of way I was brought up. But that's the way it was in the South, especially at that time period. So I just thought a real world experience might bring it to life a little bit to your class.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, look, I've had times, as you know, from places where we worked, where I was driving through Alabama and Mississippi late at night, and I got, you really can feel it's intimidating as can be. And I didn't want to let them know I was Catholic or Italian or, from New York. I mean, I think that it's very scary. Yeah. Yeah, Madeline, if you can unmute. Madeline, you have to unmute. Somehow it's not working. Still not unmuted.
There it is. Now it is. Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
For some reason, the icon along the bottom of this that allows you to do raise hand, it's gone. So I'm sorry I'm having to wave. But I just wanted to say that a lot of countries have looked at our Constitution in writing their own as new democracies were formed, and not a single one of them put the Electoral College in. We are the only country in the world to have an electoral college. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, the thing is, when you the Constitution, as I look at the Constitution, I see the influence of Montesquieu is pretty clear. The division, the separation, executive, judiciary, legislature, and all of those kind. What you find is when you dig deep are the individual paragraphs that are, about defining property, about, being able to take my property here and take it back out. And, it's the stuff that is there to define property rights that became the heart of the legal foundation for slavery. So what you have is other people have copied the Constitution. A lot of those other items are not a part of it. It's basically taken that template of three branches of government and adopting that. So yeah, it's pretty, and the Electoral College was there to provide power to the plantation owners so that they could and the Electoral College didn't have to follow what the majority vote was.
And it's not just, that was not just for the South. That was for Northern rich people too. They didn't want,
well, right, no,
they didn't want poor people to vote.
Well, certainly the northern financiers and shipbuilders and transportation company, they were certainly a part of the plantation apparatus. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
All right. Yeah.
So let's asking all to unmute now, to unmute, so we can thank Sal for a terrific class.
Very good. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Sal.
coming.
Thanks, Sal.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you next week.
Sounds
Yeah.
good.